Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I am back with the Search for Tyranny. Today we are diving back into the Heritage Foundation's Mandate for Leadership, Project 2025, and we are going to find tyranny eventually. We have not yet, but I'm sure it's in here somewhere because we keep being told that if this is put into place, it is going to cause tyranny. We will lose our democracy, and we have it a republic, so I'm not that concerned. We are, however, going to see what is contained in this, and we will discuss whether we agree or disagree with it as we go along. I am a conservative, but I am a very left leaning conservative. I'm as far to the left as you can be and still want to conserve life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so I, I, I don't hold far right extremist views, even if you think I do, because I believe in freedom. And I don't hold far left extremist views, even if you think I do, because I believe that gay marriage is okay. I'm right in the middle, and so that is the spin that I put on this. I want to be very clear about that before we begin. If you are lost, if you don't know what I'm talking about anything that I mention as we go along, you can look in the playlist that are linked above. They all contain things that are relevant to the things we discuss. I hold some slightly unconventional views, and I tend to step on toes when I talk about them. It is not intentional, but I don't apologize for them. I do have just a little bit of a vested interest in the individual branches, most especially the Navy. I served. I did not serve my entire term, but I did serve honorably. I got a general under honorable discharge because I did not play well with the other children, as my captain put it. And so I don't bring full expertise on everything military, but I do have a very good generalized knowledge of how the military works. I was combat deployed twice, so I do have some understanding of it. With all of that being said, we are going to dive into the second part of chapter 4. We did the Department of Defense. This is the individual branches, and it begins with the U.S. Army. Let's read. The U.S. Army's mission is to deploy, fight, and win our nation's war by providing ready, prompt, and sustained land dominance by Army forces across the full spectrum of conflict as part of the Joint Force. Today, however, the Army cannot execute its land dominance mission. The U.S. Army is at an inflection point that is marked by more than a decade of steadily eroding budgets and diluted buying power, an appreciable degradation in readiness and training capacity, a near crisis in the recruiting and retention of critical personnel, and a bevy of aging weapons systems that no longer provide a qualitative edge over peer and near-peer competitors, but will not be replaced in the near term. All of these challenges are set against a backdrop of a complex and dynamic global geopolitical environment that is exemplified and exasperated by the triumph of our adversaries in Afghanistan after a 20-year struggle there, as well as recent Russian outrages in the Ukraine and China's bellicosity both on its borders and in surrounding disputed regions. In spite of these ever-increasing operational pulls, our Army is consistently being asked to do more with fewer resources. The status quo is further marked by a pervasive, politically driven, top-down focus on progressive social policies that emphasize matters like so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion, and climate change, often to the detriment of the Army's core warfighting mission. Needed reforms. Rebuild the Army. The total Army budget has decreased by roughly 11% since 2018, perilously affecting the service's readiness and ability to train and procure new personnel and equipment. Declining budgets and decreased buying power have forced the Army to lower training standards and opportunities to train. Proposed reductions in end strength, slash military construction programs to historically low levels, and scale back essential modernization programs. Increase the Army budget to remain the world's preeminent land power. Accelerate the development and procurement of the 6 current Army modernization priorities: long-range precision fires, the next-generation combat vehicle, future vertical lift, the Army network, air and missile defense, and soldier lethality. That is only 5. To replace worn-out and outdated combat systems and ensure combat dominance. Increase funding to improve Army training and operational readiness. Increase the Army's force structure by 50,000 to handle 2 major regional contingencies simultaneously. Reform recruiting efforts. The Army missed its 2022 recruitment goal by 25%, or 15,000 soldiers. Focus on deployability and sustained operations. The U.S. Army's very lethal ground force capability is irrelevant if it cannot quickly deploy to locations for employment in decisive operations to secure our global security interests. Additionally, Army logisticians provide the ground transportation of both personnel and equipment, fuel, food and water, munitions, bombs and bullets, medical supplies and services, and veterinary services, food safety, that are critical to the sustainment of other services. Immediately increase the production and stockpiling of critical munitions and repair parts. Prioritize expeditionary logistics in all force design and operational planning to guarantee entry into a contested theater of war. Increase the level of joint force training, synchronization, and coordination focused on logistics. Prepare to deploy forces from degraded U.S.-based transportation infrastructure that is compromised by opposing forces. Transform Army culture and training. The Army can no longer serve as the nation's social testing ground. A rebuilt Army that is focused again on its core warfighting mission and empowered it with the tools, resources, and authorities it needs to accomplish that mission must be the next administration's highest defense priority. Stop using the Army as a testbed for social evolution. Misusing the Army in this way detracts from its core purpose while doing little to reshape the American social structure. The Army no longer reflects national demographics to the degree that it did before 1974 when the draft was eliminated. Demand accountability in senior leaders to reverse the decline in public support for military service. Reestablish the experiential base for the planning, execution, and leadership of Army formations in large-scale operations. Currently, there are no general or field-grade officers who serve as planners or commanders against a near-peer adversary in combat. That's terrifying. Examine the logic of emerging Army concepts about employing massed, long-range fires and effects without considering how to gain advantage by closing with and dominating an adversary on land. Recognize that high-intensity land combat operations cannot be sustained through short-term individual or unit rotations in the style of the sustained low-intensity campaigns conducted over the past 20 years. Transform how the National Guard is employed during extended operations short of a declared war to preclude back-to-back federal and state deployments of National Guard soldiers in order to stabilize and preserve military volunteerism in our communities. I'm going to tell you now, that's going to have the opposite effect. Revamp Army school curricula to concentrate on preparation for large-scale land operations that focus on defeating a peer threat. Address the underlying casual issues driving increasing Army suicide rates, which have surpassed pre-World War II rates and are now eclipsing the rate among civilians. All right, there is a lot in here, right? I am not an expert on the Army, nor do I claim to be one, but I do speak in general terms for the military writ large when I talk about some of these things. Deploying the National Guard, right? Transform how the National Guard is employed during extended operations short of declared war to preclude back-to-back federal and state deployments of National Guard soldiers. Right? That is simply just trying to cut down how many deployments the National Guard is now. The National Guard is a reserve force, absolutely. They are highly trained. They are extremely effective at their jobs, and they should never be deployed overseas except in extreme duress, which we have not been in my lifetime. Now, you can say what you want about the situations that were going on. I was involved in them. I have ribbons for them. And so I do get to talk a little bit about it. And the National Guard is our defense here. It is for national emergencies that happen. It is for homeland invasion. God forbid should it happen. They are here for state support. They should not be removed from the state except in the case of extreme duress. We are under imminent threat of defeat. Our main source of problems in those areas over there were the handcuffs that we put on ourselves. We are honorable people. We are trying to be honorable service, and that is a good and laudable thing. But a lot of our problems were from being too nice. We were at war. We are at war. We will be at war. And we need to understand that in order to win war, you have to be ruthlessly effective. And I say that as someone who preaches nonviolence all the time. Right? I do believe that we can resolve almost everything in a nonviolent way, but there are times when violence is the answer. It should be the last recourse. It should be in defense almost exclusively. But sometimes it is necessary, and if it is necessary, then the handcuffs need to be real loose. We don't want war crimes. I am not advocating war crimes, but some things that are considered problems now probably should not be. If you are hiding behind someone, not to say to kill the someone, but if that is a willing someone that you are hiding behind, they are also a combatant. That is what it is. I do not wish anyone to have to do the things that have been done in the name of our country, in the name of service to our country and freedom. A lot of very terrible things have happened, and a lot of people on the right do not want to talk about that. A lot of people on the left over-exaggerate it. But here in the center, we acknowledge it. Terrible things happened, but they had to happen. Little ones, they can carry things that will kill you too. And that is a terrible thing to realize, and it is a terrible thing to run through. These guys were driving down the street and under threat for trying to do the right thing in their eyes. They served honorably, doing what they were supposed to do. But the active duty, they volunteer for a different thing than what the National Guard does. Right? And both of them are honorable completely, right? This guy, active duty, he is volunteering for service overseas in the defense of his country and to be called up when and where and however necessary for dealing with outside of this country, because you're not supposed to be dealing with inside of the country, right? And the National Guard, they sign up to protect the homeland. And those two should be separate and equally well funded. They are there for a reason, and we have them for a reason, and they are good, honorable places, as long as the leadership is correct and is holding people actually accountable. The Army's going to catch a lot of flack because they were in the first in this, but it goes for all of the branches, right? We train. We train to be effective. I can't speak for other ships in the Navy, but on my ship, the USS Cape St. George under Hardball Harvey, who later became an admiral, we trained. We did late night drills. We did long-term drills. We did firing drills. We did so many drills, but we were good at what we did because he pushed us hard, and that is something that needs to happen in the military. If you are too soft for that type of a life, you are too soft for the military. If you cannot take being waking up at 2 o'clock to be at battle stations within 5 minutes, you are too soft to be in the military. If you cannot immediately respond to do your job and keep your head under pressure, you do not deserve to be in the military. If you are physically unfit to do the physical requirements of your job, you are unfit to be in the military, and you do not need to be there. That includes senior staff who are too large and can't make the PT and they get exemptions. That is not a thing, right? It should not be a thing. We should demand the absolute best. I spoke on this with police and teachers, and I believe the same thing for the military. They should be the best funded, best paid, best taken care of part of us, but it should be a very hard job to get. Almost nobody should be able to do it. We should expect the very best from our servicemen and women. I did not meet those standards. I am not speaking from a place of bitterness. I take full accountability for the things I did. The Navy tried very hard to keep me in, to change me, to give me structure, and I resisted the entire time. But they tried really hard. I had a good command. There are way too many commands that are not held to account. If you don't know what I'm talking about, talk to Fort Hood, right? Talk to Camp Lejeune. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you probably didn't serve, because there are those places everywhere. Individual ships can be that way. Individual bases can be that way. Individual commands can be that way. And we need a way to hold them to the account that they should be held to account of. I believe, I have covered everything that I needed to here, right? I believe best trained. Though I want us to have the largest army. I do not want our National Guard deployed overseas. They are for our home defense. We need them boys here. This should be a job that people want. Everybody left because of the mandates, right? All of the good people left because of the mandates. That is going to be a very hard thing to get over. Do you realize how hard it had to be for the military people to be like, no, I'll take that discharge instead? That's a big step for people, right? I was in there when the anthrax mandate came down, right? There's a good possibility that some of my issues came from that. There's no medical proof of that, so I can't claim that, but it is a high possibility. I was forced to take it. There was no choice, right? You're in the military. You don't get a choice. It is that or the chicken dinner. You know how hard it is to choose the chicken dinner? Bruh. All right, let's talk about mine now. The U.S. Navy. As noted at the beginning of this chapter, the U.S. Constitution gives Congress the power to provide and maintain a navy. Inherent in this phrase is a recognition that there is a vital national interest in the maritime environment, and that this national interest requires sustained planning and investment. This is as true today as it was almost 250 years ago and will remain true into the future. The U.S. Navy exists for two primary reasons: to project prompt, sustained, and effective combat power globally, both at sea and ashore, and to deter aggression by potential adversaries by maintaining a forward operating presence in conjunction with allies and partners. Today, the People's Republic of China, People's Liberation Army, Navy plan can challenge the USN's ability to accomplish its mission in the Pacific and Indian Oceans. In the production, employment, and control of maritime forces, the USN must consider the scope and rate of technological change and, where appropriate, adapt its processes and workforce development. In balancing the necessary long-term industrial model of naval platforms against emerging short-term opportunities, the Navy must take account of advances that may present vulnerabilities and risk as well as what is assured and secure. Needed reforms invest in and expand force structure. The USN's organizing principle remains platform-centered, vessels manned by sailors. The manned surface and subsurface force act in concert with land-based, air-based, and space-based forces to project power outside sovereign territory, principally by operating in international waters. Investments must be closely coordinated with these other elements of military power. Build a fleet of more than 355 ships. Develop and field unmanned systems to augment the manned forces. Require that range and lethality be key factors in all procurement and sustainment decisions for ships, aircraft, and munitions. Re-establish the General Board. In contrast with the Navy General Board that served ship development so well during the interwar period, the current joint process for defining the requirements for major defense acquisitions is not well suited to long-term planning of the sort that is needed for the USN fleet's architecture and shipbuilding. The Interwar General Board should serve as a model, empowered with final decision over all requirement documents concerning ships and a major defense systems fielded on ships. The individual board members would ensure a broad base of knowledge as well as independent thinking. Establish a Rapid Capabilities Office. The USN must transition technology into warfighting capability more rapidly. It must foster a culture of innovation that includes connecting theoretical and intangible ideas with real production environments that produce tangible and practical outcomes, and adapting proven processes to advance material solutions. Harness innovation and willingness to tolerate risk so that good enough systems can be fielded rapidly. Use the Space Development Agency as a model. Establish an oversight board of directors made up of the Service Chief, Service Secretary, and Undersecretary of Defense for acquisition and sustainment. Accelerate the purchase of key munitions. It takes years to build and maintain navies, but only hours to expend their ordnance in combat. The Navy must be prepared to expend large quantities of air-launched and sea-launched stealthy precision cruise missiles against targets both at sea and ashore. Additionally, modern air defense requires the use of high-performance surface-to-air missiles. Produce key munitions at the maximum rate with significant capacity. Working with Congress, employ the widest possible range of techniques to enhance the munitions supply chain and workforce. Enhance warfighter development. The USN requires a variety of documented qualifications for personnel to advance in their careers and assume leadership positions. It also requires individual professional qualifications that are focused on warfighting. Mandate qualifications that demonstrate an understanding of core competence in collective, integrated warfighting, especially based on current plans and technologies. Elevate the headquarters staff focused on warfighter development. And 7, within the Office of the Chief of Naval Operations, OPNAV, and empower it to develop such requirements. Require that war games be utilized as experimental learning environments for the participants as a prerequisite for achieving career milestones, department heads, commanding officers, and major commanders. Highlight in training and leader development that USN forces can and must maintain the ability to operate from and or defend sovereign territory, to include our allies and partners. Train to balance from kinetic to non-kinetic, and from lethal to non-lethal through effective command and control. Okay, so this one I do have a little bit of experience with. I have been in the Navy, and most of the recommendations have been, just give them more stuff, right? We do need better training. I will 100% stand on that entirely with both feet. That is not to say that they are ineffective, right? There is a procedure in place for every single thing that you do in the Navy, but there is not one for helping you to develop yourself within the Navy. For most of the Navy, and I can speak on this one, right? I was an engineman. I was an air conditioner repair technician aboard my ship. When I got out of the Navy, as a diesel engine mechanic certified, as a millwright certified, and as an air conditioner repairman certified by the Navy, I could not find a job doing any of those things. I became a boilermaker and a pipe fitter because it was construction and it's what I could do. I went back into carpentry, right? I dived back into the plants and I worked. I made good money, but none of it had anything to do with my training in the Navy, except for possibly, being able to bolt things up in the correct way. We need a better way to ensure that the people coming out are functionally able to do things, even the people for the short term, right? They're fairly good about making sure once you make E6 that you're getting some kind of training that will benefit you if you get out. But if you're at an E2, you're not. We need to ensure that we are training people to be serviceable on the way out, right? We get a lot of kids in and they don't know what they're doing, and you turn them loose, they get a lot of freedom that they did not have. There's a lot of structure, right? But there's a lot of freedom too. I did a lot of wild things in the Navy. And so we need to give them better tools to equip themselves, right? I'm not telling you to force training on anybody, but I had zero clue that there was an apprenticeship training until I was 3 days before leaving my boat. I did not know that there was a whole process that you can go through where you can get checked off and have what you actually need for the real world done. Nobody ever mentioned that I remember at all, from boot camp to A school to C school to reporting to the command. Nobody ever and told us about the apprenticeship shit. Like, that's crazy. We should be promoting that because getting out with a skill is a good thing. It keeps a lot of people from doing the dumb things that happen. The people are people who are living on the streets. There are people who couldn't find anything to do because they were just an infantryman. There's a lot of learning capabilities in infantry. There is a lot of things that you can learn, but we don't utilize them. The same thing for a deck seaman or the fireman recruit. We need to focus on developing our people. The people who volunteer to join are the best that we have for the most part, right? There are some people like me who are not the best, but for the most part, the people I served with were. We should be taking care of them better. All right, let's talk about the Ch4 real quick. Had to take a dig. Shout out to Tamisha, my cousin, who was in the Ch4. The U.S. Air Force today lacks a force structure with the lethality, survivability, and capacity to fight a major conflict with a great power like China. Don't worry, we got you. The Navy's got it under control, for real. Like I didn't talk about the power projection and all of that. I did that in the last video. The Navy can handle it. Now, we might run out of equipment, but we can handle it if we got the arms. Deter nuclear threats and meet its operational requirements under the National Defense Strategy. For 30 years, the Air Force has received less annual funding, if pass-through funding, defined as money in the Air Force budget that does not go to the Air Force, is removed from the equation, than the Army and Navy have received. This underfunding has forced the Air Force to cut its forces and forgo modernizing aging weapon systems that were never designed to operate in current threat environments and are structurally and mechanically exhausted. The result is an Air Force that is the oldest, smallest, and least ready in its history. The decline in Air Force capacity and capability is occurring at the same time the security environment demands the very options that the Air Force uniquely provides. Combatant commanders routinely request more Air Force capacities than the service has the capacity to provide. The Air Force today simply cannot accomplish all the missions it is required to perform. The Air Force has consistently stated on the official record that it is not sized to meet the mission demands placed on it by the various U.S. combatant commands. A 2018 study, The Air Force We Need, showed a 24% deficit in the Air Force capacity to meet the needs of the National Defense Strategy. These conclusions remain valid and are more pronounced today because of subsequent aircraft retirements. The demand is also higher because of world events. To understand these trends, one only needs to consider that the Air Force's future 5-year budget plan retires 1,463 aircraft while buying just 467. This makes for a reduction of 996 aircraft by 2027. The net result is a force that is smaller, older, and less ready at a time when demand is burgeoning. Needed reforms. Increased spending and budget accuracy in line with a threat-based strategy. Returning the U.S. military to a force that can achieve deterrence or win in a fight, if necessary, requires returning to a threat-based defense strategy. Real budget growth combined with a more equitable distribution of resources across the armed services is the only realistic way to create a modernized Air Force with the capacity to meet the needs of the National Defense Strategy. Additionally, as noted above, pass-through funding causes numbers cited in current DoD budget documents to be higher than the dollar amounts actually received by the Air Force. Adopt a two-war force defense strategy with scenarios for each service that will allow the Air Force to attain the resources it requires by developing a force sizing construct that reflects what is required to accomplish strategic objectives. Eliminate pass-through funding, which has grown to more than $40 billion a year and has caused the Air Force to be chronically underfunded for decades. Increase the Air Force budget by 5% annually after adjusting for inflation to reverse the decline in size, age, and readiness and facilitate the transition to a more modern, lethal, and survivable force. Reduce near-term and mid-term risk. Increasing the Air Force's acquisition of next-generation capabilities that either are or soon will be in production will increase the ability of the United States to deter or defeat near-term to mid-term threats. Increase the F-35A procurement to 60 to 80 per year. Build the capacity for a B-21 production rate of 15 to 18 aircraft per year, along with applicable elements of the B-21 long-range strike family of systems. Increase Air Force airlift and aerial refueling capacity to support agile combat employment operations that generate combat sorties from a highly dispersed posture in both Europe and the Pacific. Develop and buy larger quantities of advanced mid-range weapons, 50 nanometer to 200 nanometer, that are sized to maximize targets per sortie for stealth aircraft flying in contested environments against target sets that could exceed 100,000 aim points. Accelerate the development and production of the Sentinel intercontinental ballistic missile to reduce the risk inherent in an aging Minuteman III force in light of China's modern nuclear modernization breakout. increase the number of EC-37 Bravo electronic warfare aircraft from 10 to 20 in order to achieve a minimum capacity to engage growing threats from China across the electromagnetic spectrum. Invest in future Air Force programs and efforts. Increasingly capable adversaries require new capabilities to enable victory against those adversaries. Attain an operationally optimized advanced battle management system as the Air Force element of the DoD Joint All-Domain Command and Control Enterprise. Produce the next generation air dominance system of systems. Air moving target indication, other sensors, communications, command and control weapons, and uninhabited aerial vehicles. Achieve moving target engagement capability and capacity against sea, surface, and ground mobile targets at the scale necessary to meet the needs of the National Defense Strategy. Build resilient basing, sustainment, and communications for survivability in a contested environment. Establish a vigorous and sufficiently funded electromagnetic spectrum operation recovery plan to make up for more than 20 years of neglect of this mission area. That is an interesting one. Again, I don't have a whole lot of experience with the Air Force, right? I can't talk a whole lot about it. I haven't even been to a whole lot of Air Force bases, right? I've been to some Marine bases. I've been to some Army bases. I've never actually been to an Air Force base that I can recall. Or is Port Canaveral? I'm not sure. I don't know. That was NASA, so I don't think it's Air Force. But anyway, I don't have a whole lot to add to this. They should be well funded. Now, I do believe that we are deployed in a lot of places that we probably shouldn't be, most of them because of the Air Force and their range capabilities. I understand fully what they bring to the table. I just don't like being in other people's houses. And so, I'm, again, for expanding the Navy, we have a very large Air Force ourselves, and it is quite effective for most of the things, right? The Air Force has specialized things. They absolutely do this. Electromagnetic spectrum operations, that's interesting to me if you don't know anything about my other stuff. Right, we talk about the electromagnetics a lot for a reason. That's a good area to be focused in defense in. I absolutely agree with that. All right, so now let's talk about the red-headed stepchildren. My department's the little babies. This is the U.S. and Mara and Kirops, right? My boys. I pick on my crayon eaters, but we love them to death. The U.S. Marine Corps, the USMC, is the maritime land force of the Department of Defense and Department of the Navy. It serves a critical role as an expeditionary, amphibious force that can project power from sea to shore and beyond, while performing other specialized missions like securing America's diplomatic outposts abroad. Between the terrorist attack of September the 11th of 2001 and the conclusion of the U.S. military operations in Afghanistan in August of 2022, the Marine Corps engaged in extended operations ashore as directed by the Secretary of Defense, leaving it with little opportunity or ability to train for and execute the naval and amphibious operations for which it is uniquely suited and directed by law. This lengthy divergence from its primary mission led to a deep concern that the Corps had become a second land army, prompting senior Marine Corps leaders to push for the service to return to the sea. In addition, the U.S. Marine Corps spent nearly 2 decades fighting counterinsurgency wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and developed capabilities that were specifically geared to those fights but have limited utility in scenarios involving evenly matched and advancing enemies or amphibious operations that are necessary for the projection of naval power. As a result, Marine Corps Commandant General David H. Berger developed and began to implement Force Design 2030, a plan that, if completed, would be the most radical transformation of the Marine Corps since World War II. The successful implementation of this force redesign, coupled with reforms in the Marine Corps personnel system and the Navy's amphibious shipbuilding plans, will be critical to ensuring the Corps' future combat effectiveness. Needed reforms. Divest systems to implement the Force Design 2030 transformation, divesting equipment that is less relevant to distributed low-signature operations in a contested maritime environment will make funds available for modernization. Transform the USMC force structure. Eliminate all USMC law enforcement battalions. Transform at least one Marine Infantry Regiment into a Marine Littoral Regiment. I don't know what that means. Somebody let me know in the comments below. Reduce the size of the remaining infantry battalions. Divest systems or equipment that are better suited to heavier U.S. Army units. Maintain divestment of M1 Abrams tanks. Eliminate the majority of tube artillery, M777 batteries. Reduce the number of advanced amphibious assault vehicles and the number of their replacements. Use funds made available by divestment of systems to support new systems that are geared to the likely needs of future conflicts. Increase the number of rocket artillery batteries, HIMARS. Increase the number of upgraded light armor vehicle companies, LAVs. Increase the number of unmanned aerial systems and anti-air systems, including counter-UAS systems. Develop long-range strike missiles and anti-ship missiles for the Corps, and modernize USMC infantry equipment. Transform the Marine Corps personnel paradigm. More than the other services, the Marine Corps relies heavily on junior non-commissioned officers, NCOs, to staff key positions across the force, but especially in combat arms. For example, E4s routinely hold squad leader billets when the Army normally has E6s in those billets. The nature of a more distributed operations and the increasingly complex responsibilities of a Marine Corps rifle squad and platoon under Force Design 2030 will only put more responsibility on the back of the squad leaders and platoon sergeants, increasing the need for more senior Marines in those critical positions. Additionally, the Corps needs to improve its retention of junior NCOs after their first enlistments. The Marines have much lower rates of reenlistment than other branches. Align the USMC's combat arms rank structure with the U.S. Army's. Squad leader billets are for E6s and platoon sergeant billets are for E7s. Create better incentives to retain talented junior NCOs, especially in infantry and other critical military occupational specialties. Reduce unnecessary deployments to increase dwell time in order to enable a more robust primary military education. Align Navy amphibious shipbuilding with Force Design 2030. The U.S. Navy has struggled for decades to maintain an amphibious fleet that could support USMC war plans around large-scale amphibious operations. In addition, amphibious shipbuilding has often had to compete against other priorities within a constrained budget and limited shipbuilding capacity. Develop and produce light amphibious warships to support more distributed amphibious operations, especially in the Pacific. Maintain between 28 and 31 larger amphibious warships as opposed to the 25 specified in current Navy shipbuilding plans and the 38 specified before 2028. Okay, so we do need a lot better job training our Marines. And I say that with all the love in the heart, but there is plenty of reason for the jokes, right? We love our grunts, but when I was joining, right, I didn't have a whole lot of choice about if I was going to join. I had a choice about what I was going to join. So I did the research. Average lifespan for a jarhead on day one of the beach is 15 seconds. The Army is 45 seconds. The Air Force is 8 minutes. The Navy is 8 years. So I'm going to go with the Navy, right? We can dodge the bullets they shoot at us with the ship. Like, the whole ship can move out of the way. And so that was my reasoning. I did not want to be on the beachhead. Call me what you want. I was in the combat area. I was there willing to fight, but I didn't want to be the one charging up the beach. Nobody wants to be the one charging up the beach, except for some people. It takes a very special person, and I'm not putting down on the valor, right? I'm not. But again, it comes down to equipping our boys for the other side. It comes down to equipping the guys who are making the sacrifice, who are actually picking up the rifle and putting on the uniform to make sure they're taken care of on the other side. They're not being taken care of, right? Our home bases, our bases here, Camp Lejeune, military or Marine Corps home, like the place, right? Terrible. The morale in that place is dog shit. You can't blame that on the lower enlisted. You have to blame that on leadership. Most of the problems with young men, writ large, is lack of definite direction. If they have a plan, they have some hope, and they have something they can work towards, they do better. That includes in the military. If you give them career planning, because you're not getting out of the infantry and doing anything else with your life. And nobody wants to be in the infantry for 8 years or for 15, right? They want to, like, you can sucker an 18-year-old into charging the beachhead. Again, I'm not downplaying, but you can sucker the 18-year-old. Like, they suckered 18-year-olds into the Navy by telling them that there was McDonald's on the ships, right? That is real. That really happened. They're suckering these 18-year-olds to charge them the beachheads by telling them things. But then there's no follow through on the things. There's no taking care of our people on the backside of it. There's no get out of the military and you're going to get a good job. No. There's a good chance that you can start your own business. Okay. If you do the GI Bill, you can get your schooling paid for if you're willing to fight. But if you're disabled, fight for your right to live. They say you get 2 chances to die for your country, once while you're on active duty and once when you go to the VA. Let's talk about the Space Force. The U.S. Space Forces conduct global space operations to sustain and enhance air, land, and sea effectiveness, lethality, and superiority by providing secure broadband global communications, precision position, navigation and timing accuracy, attack warning and threat tracking, and targeting capability. Real-time intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance information. And there is assured continuity of operations both by defending U.S. assets and by conducting offensive operations that are capable of imposing unacceptable losses on adversaries that might seek to attack them. The U.S. Space Force, USSF, was established to assure continuous global and theater combat support from space, to deter attacks against U.S. space assets, and to prevail in space should deterrence fail. The USSF posture was conceived as a balance of offensive and defensive deterrent capabilities designed for maximum effectiveness. Needed reforms reversed the Biden administration's defensive posture. The Biden administration has eliminated almost all offensive deterrence capabilities and instead will rely solely on defensive capabilities of disaggregation, maneuver, and reconstitution, the most costly, the slowest, and ultimately the most fragile architectural selection. Reestablish offensive capabilities to guarantee a favorable balance of forces, efficiently manage the full deterrent spectrum, and seriously complicate enemy calculations of a successful first strike against the U.S. space assets. Restore architectural balance in the U.S. Space Forces, both offensive and defensive, to restore determinants dominance, efficiently and quickly. Rapidly expand space control capability to include cislunar space, the region beginning at geosynchronous altitude and encompassing the moon, to provide early warning of an enemy attack. Seek arms control and rules of the road understandings only when they are unambiguously in the interest of the U.S. and its allies and prohibit their unilateral implementation. Reduce overclassification. The USSF must move beyond the Cold War era culture of secrecy and overclassification that surrounded military space to facilitate greater coordination and synchronization of efforts across the government and commercial sectors. Declassify appropriate information about terrestrial and on-orbit space capabilities that threaten the U.S. space constellation, as well as those being pursued by our competitors, to secure the principled right to counter them offensively. Implement policies suited to a mature USSF. No longer a newborn, the USSF has entered its 4th year of existence, and the lessons learned can be incorporated across all forces of the force to increase its effectiveness. Restructure from the current unity of effort structure to unity of command. Lead the U.S. government's development of a clear and unambiguous declaratory policy that the United States will operate at will in space, and enforce these operations with capabilities that ensure effective deterrence and the ability to impose our will if necessary. In the current study phase of concept development and issue necessary guidance for the development and fielding of offensive capabilities. Alter the Space Development Agency's current fail early approach and transition to a methodology that maintains aggressive timelines, but with significantly greater engineering rigor, with special attention to sustainment, support, and fully integrated space operations. Increase the number of general officer positions to ensure the Space Force's ability to compete for resources on a common basis with the other services. Explore creation of a Space Force Academy to attract top astro students, engineers and scientists, and develop astronauts. The academy could be attached initially to a large existing research university like the California Institute of Technology or MIT, share faculty and funding, and eventually be built separately to be on par with the other service academies. And so that's the Space Force, and I am all for what we do in space. Like, I, the offensive and defensive capabilities fight, okay? We should be absolutely be able to defend and, if necessary, to go on the offensive. That is never a question in my mind. We are on defensive posture in most places that we patrol as the Navy, but we are capable of going offensive at threats at any point in time. Should be the same in space, no doubt. I think that we should be focusing on exploration. That is, a lot of that has been pushed to the private side, and that is a good thing. The more that we can get normal Americans working on without security clearances, the better off we will all be. But I think that we do have a place, absolutely, for our Navy. I want the Navy to be on it, but apparently it's going to be the Space Force, right? You're living on a vessel in space. It should be the Navy. I'm just saying. But anyway, I'm all for exploration. I'm all for let's get out there, see what's out there. Let's get out there and capture what resources we can. I'm not altogether convinced that we need to be bringing back a whole lot of them on planet. I am more for space-based operations for the refinement and use of things, but that's going to be well beyond my hands. I would love to see more go into the Space Force, more go into private space exploration. I really do. I think that it is better for all of us if we are spending our money on researching space and less on killing people. That's just how I like to look at it. So, the U.S. Cyber Command. U.S. Cyber Command was established in 2010 by the Department of Defense to unify the direction of cyberspace operations, strengthen DoD cyberspace capabilities, and integrate and enhance U.S. cyber expertise. Cyber capabilities and threats are evolving rapidly. Accordingly, a conservative administration should be especially sensitive to and prepared to meet the challenges presented by bureaucratic silos, inappropriately rigid tactical doctrine, and strategic thinking's historic tendency to lag behind technological capability. The preliminary evidence from the war in Ukraine suggests that existing cyber doctrine and certain capability and target assumptions may be incorrect or misplaced. The following recommendations therefore presuppose that there will be a rigorous lessons learned analysis and review of existing U.S. doctrine in light of battlefield evidence. Needed reforms. Ensure that U.S. Cybercom is properly focused. Mission creep is leading to wasteful overlap with the Department of Homeland Security, National Security Agency, Department of Defense, and Central Intelligence Agency. Separate U.S. Cybercom from the National Security Agency per congressional direction. Conduct effective offensive cyber effects operations at the tactical and strategic levels. Expand defensive cyber effects operations authorized by President Trump's classified National Security Presidential Memorandum 13. United States Cyber Operations Policy. End U.S. Cybercom's participation in federal efforts to fortify U.S. elections to eliminate the perception that DoD is engaging in partisan politics. Increase U.S. Cybercom's effectiveness. Accelerate the integration of cyber and electronic warfare, doctrine and capabilities abiding by the time-tested norms of combined arms warfare. mandate that development teams will include both coders and soldiers, aircrew and sailors, with kinetic experience on the platoon level. Break the paradigm of cyber authorities held at the strategic level. Increase cyber resilience by, for example, protecting the Nuclear Command, Control, and Communications Network, and the Air Force's Cyber Resiliency Office for Weapon Systems. Expand coordination of joint operations with allies. Implement the Government Accountability Office's recommendation that the DoD Chief Information Officer, Commander of U.S. Cybercom, and Commander of Joint Force Headquarters, DoD Information Network, align policy and system requirements to enable DoD to have enterprise-wide visibility of cyber incident reporting to support tactical, strategic, and military strategies for response. Rationalize strategy and doctrine. Update the October 2022 National Security Strategy to define DoD roles and responsibilities beyond existing platitudes. Apply traditional deterrence strategies and principles for using cyber electronic warfare in retaliation for foreign cyber attacks and/or EW actions against U.S. infrastructure and citizens. I don't have a whole lot to add to this. We should be protecting our electronic assets with as much vigor as possible. The corporate theft on a national level is a very real thing. It is happening through our phones and our willful and deliberate use of an app. I use it every day. I'm on TikTok. It is stealing your stuff. I just don't have anything for it to steal. Even my personal stuff is not that big of a deal. So I don't do banking on my phone. I don't have any other thing like that linked in for them to get. So it's not that big of a hazard for me. I'm not around sensitive information. But if you have seen recently, Apple is implementing the AI in their phones to always be on. And if you don't think that that camera is not recording everything, you're an idiot. If you don't believe that that AI is not going to take what is relevant and pass it on, you are also an idiot. And so we need some heavy deterrence happening, both in the attacks and threats and also in the development of AI. Special Operations Forces. Even though America's conventional war in Afghanistan was a failure, Special Operations Forces of the United States Special Operation Command, USOCOM, executed an extremely effective counterterrorism campaign. There has not been another major attack on the homeland. Global terrorist threats are reduced and managed. Collaboration with international partners is effective, and units under USOCOM are the most capable and experienced warfighters in 2 generations. There is a movement to reduce the scope and scale of USOCOM's missions in favor of service priorities and great power competition. This would be a mistake because USOCOM can be employed effectively in great power competition. It makes sense to capitalize on USOCOM's experience and repurpose its mission to include irregular warfare within the context of great power competition, thereby providing a robust organization that is capable of achieving strategic effects that are critical, both to our national defense and to the defense of our allies and partners around the globe. Irregular warfare should be used proactively to prevent state and non-state actors from negatively affecting U.S. policies and objectives while simultaneously strengthening our regional partnerships. If we maintain irregular warfare's traditional focus on non-state actors, we limit ourselves to addressing only the symptoms, non-state actors, and not the problems themselves, China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. Needed reforms. Make irregular warfare a cornerstone of security strategy. The U.S. can project strength through unified action with our interagency allies and partners by utilizing irregular warfare capabilities synchronized with elements of national power. Broadly redefining irregular warfare to address current state and non-state actors is critical to countering irregular threats that range from the Chinese use of economic warfare to Russian disinformation and Islamist terrorism. A broad definition of irregular warfare in the national security strategy would allow for a whole-of-government approach, thereby providing resources and capabilities to counter threats and ultimately serve as credible deterrents at the strategic and tactical levels. Define irregular warfare as a means by which the United States uses all elements of national power to project influence abroad, to counter state adversaries, defeat hostile non-state actors, deter wider conflict, and maintain peace in great power competition. Characterize the state and non-state irregular threats facing the U.S. by region and the national security strategy. Direct that irregular warfare resources, capabilities, and strategies be incorporated directly into the overall national defense strategy instead of being regulated to a supporting document. Establish an irregular warfare center of excellence to help DoD train, equip, and organize to conduct irregular warfare as a core competency across the spectrum of competition, crisis, and conflict. Counter China's Belt and Road Initiative globally. DoD, in conjunction with the interagency allies and partner nations, must work proactively to counter China's BRI around the globe. Task: U.S. SOCOM and corresponding organizations in the Pentagon with conceptualizing, resourcing, and executing regionally based operations to counter the BRI with a focus on nations that are key to our energy policy, international supply chains, and our defense industrial base. Use regional and global information operations to highlight Chinese violations of exclusive economic zones, violations of human rights, and coercion along Chinese fault lines in Xinjiang province, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, in addition to China's weaponization of sovereign debt. Directly counter Chinese economic power with all elements of national power in North America, Central America, and the Caribbean to maintain maritime freedom of movement and protect the digital infrastructure of nations in the region. Establish credible deterrence through irregular warfare to protect the homeland. A whole-of-government approach and willingness to employ cyber information, economic, and counterterrorist irregular warfare capabilities should be utilized to protect the homeland. Include the designation of U.S. SOCOM as lead for the execution of irregular warfare against hostile state and non-state actors in the national defense strategy. Demonstrate a willingness to employ offensive cyber capabilities against adversaries who conduct cyber attacks against U.S. infrastructure, businesses, personnel, and governments. Employ a name and shame approach by making information regarding the names of entities that target democratic processes and international norms available in a transparent manner. Work with the interagency to employ economic warfare, lawfare, and diplomatic pressure against hostile state and non-state actors. Maintain the authorities necessary for an aggressive counterterrorism posture against threats to the homeland. We have special forces. We have special forces for a reason. They are highly trained. They are highly effective, and we have them for reasons that they need to be highly trained and highly effective in, and we should utilize them as little as possible in the manner in which they were intended to be used. Nuclear deterrence. Nuclear deterrence is one of the most critical elements of U.S. national security, as it forms a backstop to the U.S. military forces. Every operational plan relies on the assumption that nuclear deterrence holds. Ever since the U.S. first acquired nuclear weapons, administrations of both parties have pursued a strategy designed to deter nuclear and non-nuclear attack, assure allies, and in the event of nuclear employment, restore deterrence at the lowest possible cost to the U.S. Today, however, America's ability to meet these goals is increasingly challenged by the growing nuclear threats posed by our adversaries. China is pursuing a strategic breakout of its nuclear forces, significantly shifting the nuclear balance and forcing the U.S. to learn how to deter two nuclear peer competitors, China and Russia, simultaneously for the first time in its history. Russia is expanding its nuclear arsenal and threatening using the threat of nuclear employment as a coercive tactic in its war on Ukraine. North Korea is advancing its nuclear capabilities. Iran is inching closer to nuclear capability. Meanwhile, all U.S. nuclear capabilities and the infrastructure on which they rely date from the Cold War and are in dire need of replacement. The next administration will need to focus on continuing the effort to modernize the nuclear triad while updating our strategy and capabilities to meet the challenges presented by a more threatening nuclear environment. Needed reforms. Prioritize nuclear modernization. All components of the nuclear triad are far beyond their intended lifetimes and will need to be replaced over the next decade. This effort is required for the U.S. to maintain its nuclear triad and will be the bare minimum needed to maintain U.S. strategic nuclear deterrence. Accelerate the timelines of critical modernization programs, including the Sentinel missile, long-range standoff weapon, Columbia-class ballistic missile submarine, B-21 bomber, and F-35 dual-capable aircraft. Reject any congressional proposals that would further extend the service life of U.S. capabilities, such as the Minuteman III ICBM. Ensure sufficient funding for warhead life extension programs, including the B-61 TAC-12, W-80 TAC-4, W-87 TAC-1 mod, and W-88 ALT-370. Develop the Sea-Launched Cruise Missile Nuclear SLM TAC-N, SLCM TAC-N. In 2018, the Trump administration proposed restoring the SLCM TAC-N to help fill in a growing gap in U.S. non-strategic capabilities and improve deterrence against limited nuclear attack. The Biden administration canceled this program in its 2022 Nuclear Posture Review. The next president should support and accelerate funding for the development of the SLCM TAC-N with the goal of deployment by the end of the decade. Account for China's nuclear expansion to ensure its ability to deter both Russia and the growing Chinese nuclear threat. The U.S. will need more than the bare minimum of nuclear modernization. President Biden's 2022 NPR described the problem but proposed no recommendations to restore or maintain nuclear deterrence. Consider procuring more modernized nuclear systems such as the Sentinel missile or LRSO than currently planned. Improve the ability of the U.S. to utilize the triad's upload capacity in case of a crisis. Review what capabilities in addition to the SLCM TAC-N, for example, non-strategic weapons or new warhead designs, are needed to deter the unique Chinese threat. Restore the nuclear infrastructure. The United States must restore its necessary nuclear infrastructure so that it is capable of producing and maintaining nuclear weapons. Accelerate the effort to restore plutonium pit production, which is essential both for modern warhead programs and for recapitalizing the stockpile. Continue to invest in rebuilding infrastructure, including facilities at the national laboratories that support nuclear weapon development. Restore readiness to test nuclear weapons at the Nevada National Security Site to ensure the ability of the U.S. to respond quickly to asymmetric technology surprises. Correctly orient arms control. The U.S. should agree to arms control agreements only if they help to advance the interests of the U.S. and its allies. Reject proposals for nuclear disarmament that are contrary to the goal of bolstering deterrence. Pursue arms control as a way to secure the national security interest of the U.S. and its allies rather than as an end in itself. Prepare to compete in order to secure U.S. interests should arms control efforts continue to fail. We're going to go right into missile defense. Missile defense is a critical component of the U.S. national security architecture. It can help deter attack by instilling doubt that an attack will work as intended, take adversary cheap shots off the table, and limit the perceived value of missiles as a tool of coercion. It also allows space for diplomacy during a crisis and can protect U.S. and allied forces, critical assets, and populations if deterrence fails. Adversaries are relying increasingly on missiles to achieve their aims. China and Russia, in addition to their vast and growing ballistic missile inventories, are deploying new hypersonic glide vehicles and investing in new ground-launched, air-launched, and sea-launched cruise missiles that uniquely challenge the United States in different domains. North Korea has pursued an aggressive missile testing program and is becoming increasingly belligerent towards South Korea and Japan. Iran continues to maintain a missile arsenal that is capable of striking U.S. and allied assets in the Middle East and Europe, and its rocket launches demonstrate that it either has or is developing the ability to build ICBMs. Missile defense has been prioritized and underfunded in recent years. In light of these growing threats, the incoming administration should treat missile defense as a top priority. Needed reforms. Champion the benefit of missile defense. Despite its deterrence and damage limitation benefits, opponents argue incorrectly that U.S. missile defense is destabilizing because it threatens Russian and Chinese second strike capabilities. Reject claims made by the left that missile defense is destabilizing while acknowledging that Russia and China are developing their own advanced missile defense systems. Commit to keeping homeland missile defense off the table in any arms control negotiations with Russia and China. Strengthen homeland ballistic missile defense. The United States currently deploys 44 ground-based interceptors, GBIs, as part of its ground-based mid-course defense GMD system to defend the homeland against North Korea. But as North Korea improves its missile program, this system is at risk of falling behind the threat. Buy at least 64 of the next generation interceptor, the NGI, which is more advanced than the GBI, for an eventual uniform fleet of interceptors. The Biden administration currently plans to buy 20. Consider additional steps to strengthen the GMD system, such as a layered missile defense or a third interceptor site on the East Coast. Increase the development of regional missile defense. As the Ukraine conflict amply demonstrates, U.S. regional defense missile defense capabilities are very limited. The United States has been unable to supply our partners reliably with any capabilities, and the number and types of regional missile defense platforms are less than the U.S. needs for its own defense. The U.S. should prioritize procurement of more regional defense systems such as Theater High Altitude Area Defense, THAAD, Standard Missile Ch4, and Patriot missiles. Change U.S. missile defense policy. Historically, the U.S. has chosen to rely solely on deterrence to address the Russian and Chinese ballistic missile threat to homeland, and to use homeland missile defense only against rogue nations. Abandon the existing policy of not defending the homeland against Russian and Chinese ballistic missiles, and focus on how to improve defense as the Russian and Chinese missile threats increase at an unprecedented rate. Invest in future advanced missile defense technologies like directed energy or space-based missile defense that could defend against more numerous missile threats. Invest in new track and intercept capabilities. The advent of hypersonic missiles and increased numbers of cruise missile arsenals by threat actors poses new challenges to our missile defense capabilities. Invest in cruise missile defense of the homeland. Accelerate the program to deploy space-based sensors that can detect and track missiles flying on non-ballistic trajectories. Accelerate the glide phase interceptor, which is intended to counter hypersonic weapons. And again, I do believe that the best offense is a good defense, right? We should be able to fully defend ourselves against all deterrents or all threats, either ballistic standard weapons or nuclear. We should be in a position as a country to defend ourselves against all threats. And that's where we're going to wrap this one up. I don't have a whole lot to add at this point, right? We talked about the salient points as we went along. There was quite a bit in here to digest, and if you are from some of the other branches, hit me in with your comments down below. Let me know what you think about the things that I said today. I hope I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a set of topics. They're not all that hard. They're not all that difficult to comprehend. There was no tyranny involved, unfortunately. We will continue the search tomorrow. If you like what I'm doing here, let me know down below. Hit me with a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment. Let me know you appreciate what I am doing. If you really appreciate it, hit me with a super thanks. It will be greatly appreciated. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete, just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt State. Peace.